Let me share my screen. So my presentation today is around EAL learners and making sure that they are comfortable in your classrooms and that you can identify and support them with the right strategies. So we're going to do exactly that. We're going to unpick a few things. Now, it's tricky to tell you everything that I want to tell you in the short amount of time that I have got available, but you know, we'll give it a good shot. I've got 3 learning objectives for you, and we're going to try and look at some of those common misconceptions around EAL and SEN. I'm going to signpost because I can't dive in as deeply as I would like to, but I'm going to signpost for you to some really great resources. And then I'm going to identify some education technology products that are helpful for EAL. Actually, they're helpful for all learners who have got literacy difficulties, but focus today is EAL, so I'm going to be looking at those particular gains. Okay, so let me work out where I am. So basically, I'm Julia. I'm head of education for Scanning Pens, so I am wearing a Scanning Pens hat, but I'm also a Senko. I don't think you ever stop being a Senko. It's kind of written through you like a stick of rock, isn't it? And so that's been my career in secondary and primary, and I also worked in special ed schools as well. So a really lovely long teaching career, lots of experience. I actually started teaching, or did my teacher training, in West London in a town called Southall, which is very close to Heathrow Airport. And to give you a bit of history and geography, from the 1950s onwards, London, that bit of West London, attracted large numbers of Asian immigrants. So Southall, where I grew up, became one of the largest Punjabi communities outside of the Indian subcontinent. And when I was at school in the 70s or 80s, I would hear 2 or 3 different languages being spoken, including Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and Bengali. And then when I started teaching in West London, and that was in the mid-90s, so I'm feeling a bit old, EAL represented 90% of the school community, but the preferred language that was spoken was predominantly the same language. And this made identifying and supporting SEN much easier to achieve because everybody spoke the same languages and had a similar background. So we could anticipate a learning pathway and predict the progress of EAL children because we could identify the students' proficiency in their first language. We had a comparative map, if you like, and that helped us to navigate expected progress. And it was that comparative map that helped us to identify SEN. Well, I've got this slide here and it's about terminology. And I think it'd be great just to dwell a little bit on EAL terminology for a moment, because it's going to set this context for this SEN conversation. So EAL learners may be literate in one language, but not in another, or they may already be bilingual when they start school. Other students, well, they may speak one language at home to parents or grandparents, and we often call this home language or first language, and sometimes preferred language. Some parents can be encouraging children to be literate in their heritage language, and they do that through teaching them at home or within their community. So many children grow up as bilingual, but in the UK, there's a process very interesting. It's known as subtractive bilingualism. And this means that over a period of time, they become monolingual. And this is as the opportunities to use and develop all of those first languages decrease. That's quite an interesting. For teachers, it's important to recognise the role that first language development plays in second language development. It's actually important to understand that by promoting development maintenance of first languages, you're actively supporting bilingualism. So using bilingual resources is the foundation of supporting teaching and learning of EAL and bilingual pupils. At the bottom of each of these slides, you'll notice that I've put a little link chain icon and I've put some links. Now, I will make sure that I share the PDF of this presentation with you all afterwards so that you can get that through the Padlet board, and you can follow these links. I've got some fantastic links for you if you want to unpack this a little bit more. So look out for those link symbols and they will take you directly to some fantastic websites with all of that additional information that you're going to find so helpful. Now that we have got a shared lexicon, she said, trying to advance the slides. There we go. It's helpful for us to do a bit of let's have a conversation about the common misconceptions around EAL and SEN. It's a tricky area, and as a Senko, I've encountered this many times throughout my career. The first time I encountered a young man with EAL and SEN, I was completely and utterly unprepared. I just did not know. What I found out later was that I was working with a boy with a hearing impairment, and that is why he was not making progress in his acquisition of spoken language. And even though I'd had conversations with mum didn't know that her little boy had a hearing impairment. So sometimes it is really, really difficult to understand what you are seeing and experiencing if you have not had an experience before. So I'm going to go on a little bit later to talk about that. Now, I told you that I grew up in Southall and I did my teaching practice in Southall. So I want to just explain what the EAL picture is like now, because it's very different to my early teaching experience. So what's happening now is that learners using English as an additional language are a really diverse group. So the country of birth, the time of arrival in the school system, the first language spoken, previous educational experience and background, all these factors that contribute to the diversity and of that learner and their likelihood to succeed. So simply put, we don't have the comparative map, not the one that I had when I was starting out teaching early on. The comparative map was that crucial thing that helped us to identify SEN. So the Bell Foundation, brilliant resource, are telling us there are currently 1.56 million EAL learners. That's just under 1 in 5, or 19.6% of all pupils aged 15 to 16 in UK schools. And the number has doubled since the late 1990s. So 1 in 11 schools, and you've got EAL pupils who are constituting more than 50% of the school's population. So really, that just makes me think, well, most teachers are going to be teaching in a multilingual classroom now. And it's important to look at each learner and not make assumptions based on aggregated data about achievement. You know this. Every student's an individual, and we have to think about them that way. Some pupils are born in the UK, but they enter school speaking little or no English and have limited or no experience of literacy in their first language. Then we've got some pupils who are born in the UK who have some experience of literacy in their first languages. And we've got other pupils who arrive between the ages of 5 and 16 without literacy or oracy skills in English, but with age equivalent skills in oracy in their first languages and sometimes in other languages as well. Some pupils enter the school system between the ages of 15 and 16 without literacy or oracy skills in English, limited or no literary skills in their first language, and that can be due to disrupted schooling. And in addition to that, some pupils have suffered emotional or psychological stress as a result of family loss or economic disruption to their lives in their countries of origin. And we've got another factor here, and it's the COVID pandemic that's raised another border around EAL pupils and has further complicated the identification and support of students with SEN. So we know that many of our EAL learners have been disadvantaged, particularly with things like limited access to the internet or peer support over these past tricky 18 months. Sometimes this means that there's been more opportunity to have exposure to home languages, or that exposure to English, spoken English, has been severely disrupted. So we're now at a time where it is crucial for you to be observing and reflecting on the language demands made by the activities that you are setting your EAL learners. It can be, let me just advance that. There we go. It can be really daunting when you have an EAL student in your class and they're not making expected progress. You may be thinking, I know very little about SEN. I don't know very much about EAL. And if that's you, my advice would be to you, and this is going to sound a bit obvious, but seek somebody out who has got a little bit more knowledge than you in both of those areas and share your concerns and thoughts with them. Don't sit on it. Go ahead and share. What I would say is, if you have got a gut feeling that you have got a student in front of you with a learning difficulty, put in the support as soon as you can. Whatever you think it should be, put in that support, because nobody is going to blame you for putting provision in place. And it's always better to try supporting something at an earlier age and stage than letting a student struggle along, doing a long period of observation, waiting for an expert, and then following the expert advice, some support going in. Start as soon as you can when you get that gut feeling. Well, we start to worry when we see a lack of engagement, and we know that we need to allow a settling in period for all of our EAL students. Sometimes students who are learning English as an additional language can be perceived as shy or perhaps reserved or unwilling to open up too soon. And that can be to do with a range of factors depending on their background. For example, your student might be having their first experience of the school where English is the main language. It's just important that we don't instantly assume that we have a case of SEN that needs to be investigated in an EAL student. And that's because overwhelming EAL students without allowing them to immerse themselves in school life, first of all, isn't conducive to their progress in the future. Another experience that I had as a SENCO with a child who was identified to me as having SEN was a little girl who would not communicate at all. And I thought, okay, well, maybe she's just in this period of time where she's just absorbing information, she's learning language. I called parents, I talked, and what transpired was that this child talked very little at school. She was a reluctant talker. It was selective mutism. And she was learning just fine, but she was just doing things her way, and she was communicating her way. And I would say with EAL, value all communication. Think about everything as communication, even behaviour as communication. It's all helping to build up a picture for you. Okay. Hey. So this is about how you signpost, or how I signpost you to some frameworks to support EAL SEN identification, because this is a big topic. So I'm going to do some questions that you might be thinking of. And these are, first of all, should I be assessing in English or home language? Then, should I be using diagnostic or standardized testing? And then, what's the most appropriate investigation pathway? So let's have a look at some of these. Your job and what you are trying to do is optimize access to learning. That's what you do. You do it really well. And as you are doing that, you are thinking, how can I ensure that I am supporting acquisition of language and comprehension, understanding of the content that we are teaching within the national curriculum? And they've got to come along at the same time. So question one, should I be assessing if I'm seeing something that I feel is perhaps SEN, assessing in English or in a home language? And the answer I would give you is start assessing in home language. And that's because you should be looking to find out how proficient that student is in their home language, and find out how well they've learnt their first language and how well they've progressed with that through their learning histories. So important to have that stakeholder viewpoint, to be talking to parents, family, people involved. Really important question for me is, are they able to follow instructions in a home language? You'll also need to know how proficient they are in English. So you're going to be needing to assess for both at this point, because your student needs both forms of assessment and they need both languages to keep progressing with their learning. So research tells us that it takes 2 years to gain conversational concrete language, that's BICS, and it takes 5 to 7 years to gain your academic language, that's CALP. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, I think that's something to have a look at. Go through to the Bell Foundation and have a look at that information. It's very helpful to give you that milestone information, and that can help you make a judgment. I would use standardized testing if you know the student is accessing school curriculum and having well differentiated lessons, and you're providing lots of language support, and they're having access to English at home, or they're hearing good models of language in the community. So in this situation, standardized testing, okay? If you're not sure if a student is acquiring language or assimilating content, this is the point where we start to wonder, might that student have an SEN? Confusing factors are where students are predominantly spending time at home speaking home language, or with the community outside of school speaking home language, which is absolutely fine, of course. It just increases the amount of time that it takes to learn that second language. Exposure is everything. Sometimes we have peers in the playground also talking home language, and that's great because we need for those learners not to be socially isolated. But your challenge really comes into place when you are trying to identify SEN, and English is the only time that English is being spoken is when you're in the classroom. So when you are teaching, the language that you're using is quite abstract and quite academically focused. And at that point in time, when you are recognizing that language is limited, I think that's where the diagnostic assessment is important, because that's our quality control measure, and it provides us with an understanding of what the appropriate support might be, or what the remediation methods are that we should look at. So I'm going to just signpost you here to some key factors for pupils with EAL, so that we can see what is affecting their achievement. So there are 4 here: the learning environment, language proficiency, access to the curriculum, and special educational needs. So we call this procedure model, and it provides an investigation pathway and systematically takes into account the factors affecting the achievement of pupils with EAL in relation to these areas. Okay, and you will find this pathway if you start to look at a document here that's provided by Birmingham City Council, and it I think has been published on the PATOS website, again link below, and it goes through the steps that are so helpful for you to follow download it, have a look. It's full of pro formas, and it will show you how to explore the reason for concern, collect the pertinent background information, evidence from your other professionals and stakeholders, analysis of that information, and identifying the pupil's needs. And it does that by looking at those areas that we just looked at. So please, if you've not come across this document, it's called EAL SEN, Distinguishing the Difference. It's a great document. It will save you a lot of time. It's very thorough. So that's my signposting for your frameworks for support. I'm now going to move on to the next bit of my presentation, which is about signposting some support for you. And this bit is about literacy and EAL learners. And what I would say is the things that you would do to support EAL learners will support all of your learners in a classroom to improve their access to literacy. I've been very keen to talk about literacy toolkit over the last year, and I've done quite a few presentations on this, and it's been really well received. And it's the idea that in a classroom you physically have a box, like just a little toolbox packet full of bits and pieces that are useful and supportive for all of your learners, so that anybody can dip in and use them, and encourage them to dip in and use them and see if they can do the business of reading support and just alleviate some difficulties. So for example, some of my students just needed that Tangle toy just to fiddle with, so that they were managing their anxiety around reading. Particularly important if you have a student who is presenting with some dyslexia difficulties. And if 1 in 10 students have dyslexia, then 1 in 10 of your EAL students will have dyslexia as well. So I'm focusing now, thinking about how do we raise these reading enjoyment opportunities up so that we can encourage our young people to become readers. So this little slide here has got some great tools on here. Sticky text highlighter strips. If you are providing really good differentiated support for reading, but you've got some words that are just not going in, it's great to say to that student, use the sticky strip. If there's a tricky word, use the sticky strip, and then that identifies a piece of work you can do later with them when you go back to that piece of vocabulary. Sticky strips are great. Other SPLDs that are part of this literacy difficulty can be things like dyspraxia. So just being able to hold your reading book open can be quite useful with a thumb holder, or perhaps having a reading view window or a coloured overlay. All of these tools are great for everybody. I'd encourage you to have this in your classroom and let everybody use them. I've got a picture of glasses there, because when I teach children, I will say, I have got no intention of trying to teach you without my glasses on. Because if I try and teach without my glasses, I am not going to be able to see your work. I'm not going to be able to read my computer screen, and anything that I write on the board, I won't be able to read that either. This is my piece of assistive technology that is essential for me, so I am going to use it. If you need to use a piece of assistive technology to support you, please use it. And if we can encourage a culture of getting out the supports that we need all the time for everybody in class, then the person who has got that slightly more significant learning difference won't feel like they're the lone person using a piece of assistive tech. That's the thing that switches people off from wanting to be a person visible with a learning difference in the classroom. So if you can normalize it for everybody, that's amazing. So in your literacy toolbox, I showed you some of the things. There's a few more here. Toobaloos are really great. Toobaloo is just like a telephone, but just the mouthpiece, and it goes from mouth to ear, and that can be really helpful if you're in a noisy classroom, just to make your pronunciation really clear. So that's called a Toobaloo. Here are some other ed tech supports that are really helpful for your EAL learners. So anything that is text to speech, where you can make materials into recorded materials. They can very often be installed on mobile devices like phones or laptops or tablets. All of those big tech providers, I'm talking Office, so Microsoft, Apple and Google have all got really great accessibility tools with translation tools built in. These are really essential for you to have. But not always do we have these tools available for students to use at home. And sometimes you want to do breakout work and you just don't have those tools to go with the student. So there are pocket tools that are worth looking at, like pocket translators, visual aids, audio book on an MP3. If you've got a student who may be presenting with SEN, you can use things like talking buttons and visual timetables. When you start to use this multisensory approach to supporting EAL, this is a significant help for these learners. So being able to hear the word written can accelerate a child's learning. It removes the frustrations of reading delays, and it keys us in on the auditory learning mode. And there are lots of these resources available. I am such a big fan of audiobooks, and you can get many of them for free. So if you've not yet investigated audiobooks, please do investigate those. So if students are having difficulty with creating something at home or in the classroom, why not create a digital audio file to go along with that student's piece of work? Now, I did mention earlier on that I am head of education for scanning pens. Scanning pens are tools that are used very successfully with EAL learners. They are a portable text scanner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, just to give you an idea about this device in case you've not seen it before. I think it's particularly helpful for our EAL learners. They do 4 jobs. They will read back text. They decode, in other words, they've got a dictionary built into them. They enable you to create a digital bridge because they can pick up words from a page and put them onto a computer screen. That's one of the functions that they do. Anywhere a cursor flashes, that information can be ported to. And if you are looking at a piece of research, a piece of written work, and you want to port it straight into a computer and you then use a Google Translate tool, that will enable you to do that. So that's quite useful in some circumstances. It's also got a voice recorder, which can be quite useful as well for recording instructions into, so that that can be played back like a dictaphone. So it's a handheld device. It contains a battery. It doesn't need any Wi-Fi to operate. It can be taken home and used at home. I think really helpful, particularly over the lockdowns that we've had, has been when our learners have been able to take this piece of kit home with them because they've had access to support. If they didn't have access to a TA or human support, at least they could have words decoded for them. So the reader pen is great if you are at the stage in your learning where you are able to independently start decoding words. It's not for somebody with no language knowledge at all. It's where you've got a basis of language knowledge. And what it will do is, I guess it's a buddy. It will increase confidence, provide some continuous support. Quite helpful for the pre-teaching of vocabulary, because you can scan words and save them into the pen's memory, and then you can go back and listen to those word definitions. So I think reader pen would be the first pen that I would probably choose for an EAL learner in my classroom. Scanning pens do have other tools that support EAL learners. Oh, that's just a testimonial that was provided by TA at Tufnell Park. That was a nice testimonial, actually, because to have the words, "This has dramatically made a difference to this pupil's ability to engage and take turns with other children and understand other children. That was a lovely piece of feedback, so I wanted to put that in. And being able to take part in jokes, oh my goodness, how important is that? Because then you're really fully accepted into your learning community and you're not feeling those barriers. Okay, so I was just talking about those other pens that Scanning Pen do. One is called the Lingo pen. This one is a translation tool. It does different things to the Scanning Pen. It will just rapidly provide a translation. Again, if you are not logged into a computer and using those computer translations, or you're working independently or somewhere where that student doesn't have that technology available, this can be a useful tool. Again, support self-confidence, as all of the Scanning Pens do. Okay, this is the slide I really wanted to talk to you about. So this is, at what point can a reader pen successfully support EAL learners? So I was mentioning you need to have an amount of language acquisition in place. So you might be in your 2nd or 3rd year of English language acquisition. You are starting to have made those links between phonemes, so that's spoken, and grapheme, which is written. So you're starting to recognize those patterns. And you are starting to practice the pronunciation of words. The reader pen will read back words to you and highlight them as you scan along a piece of text. So that means that you can listen to a word repeatedly. And that's great if you don't want to be consistently asking someone for support, or if you just want to review a particular word or a set of keywords. So that was my first port of call pen, is the reader pen. The exam pen reads the following languages. So it reads English, French, Spanish, German, Spanish, it does read Swedish, Italian, Danish, Norwegian, Dutch, Portuguese and Chinese Mandarin. So this pen is orange. It's approved by the JCQ, which means that students can use it in exams. Don't need to fill in a form 8. It's just there to help students do their reading. That might be of interest to you if you are supporting learners who are coming in at secondary school and are looking at taking some examinations, who just need a little bit of reading support for their exams. And then at the end, the Lingo pen, which I just showed you, translates 8 languages and has 20 built-in dictionaries. So it's different pens for different ages and different stages. If you are interested in finding out a little bit more, good people at Scanning Pens are really happy to pick up the phone, have a conversation with you. And I am happy to provide information and support too. I will mention another pen that might be of interest to you, and it is called the C Pen Connect. It's a Bluetooth digital highlighter. And what this does, it's not got a screen on it, so the body of the pen does not read back, but it enables you to port printed text straight to a mobile device. So this is where you might want to use a Google Translate tool, because it can immediately support translation. Quite useful. So that is the speech to text technology that text to speech technology that I wanted to talk to you about. And I'm going to segue out of Scanning Pens now, because I have got more information I wanted to share with you about EAL and SEN, and there are other tools and other devices that you might want to think about. So where can I signpost you to get some further information? Well, first of all, I'm going to let you know that I've written a little book. It's just a little one, honestly. It's called The Literacy Passport. It has got lots of documentation inside it that will help you to create a literacy profile. And that's useful as you are building up the knowledge of that pupil's level of understanding. Inside my booklet, there are lots of pro formas. There's a page on EAL and what to look out for, but it's essentially a bit of a tick box book. So did I get that right? A tick box book? Yeah, I did get that right. So what it will enable you to do is just go through and think, right, what are the stages? What are the phases? What should my learners be achieving at this particular phase? And that way, if you start looking at and recording and thinking about all of those, your students, and then make your comparison with your EAL learners and keep a record over time, that's going to help you to build up that evidence picture that you can then take to somebody else if you are feeling, yeah, I actually need a bit more support here. This document will give you the language to talk about what you are seeing. So for example, you might not have thought about observing eye control and tracking skills, or you might not have thought about tracking information about working memory. Kim's game is such a great game because you can do it multilingual. You can have pictures and home language words, and you can have objects. So if you've never played Kim's game before, whole range of objects, pop them on the table, put a cover over the top, take one away. What have you got on the table? Or you can do add to, start with one and build the vocabulary, and add to and add to. And this is a good way to work out whether you have got a student who is showing perhaps poor working memory, or perhaps slower speeds of processing. So there are some lovely little ideas in the Literacy Passport. It is free to download from the Scanning Pens website. If you want to copy and you want to contact me, I will signpost that to you, or I will send you the PDF. So hopefully you'll feel that that's a little helpful resource for you. There's also a little book that I've written called The Helping Hand Detective Agency. This is a reading comprehension activity booklet designed for children from the age of 7 to, or you could probably go up to about 13, just about. And it is just how you use a reader pen with comprehension activities, use the dictionary so that you can learn how to use that tool. I think that could be very helpful for you if you're considering using that. Righto. The last few bits of my slides here are my top EAL signposts. So where I have gone for information, what I've been thinking about. EAL Journal, NALDIC. I went to a NALDIC meeting before lockdown. It was brilliant because they have researchers regularly talking about their findings, and that might inform how you go about thinking about the students in your class or on a particular region or with a particular issue. So yeah, NALDEC produce really great research information, as does the Bell Foundation. I thought I'd also put English as Language Association of Wales in today to make sure I tick that box as well, which is a not-for-profit organisation committed to the advancement of curriculum development for pupils learning with English as an additional language. You can just have a look at these as you go. Lots and lots of supporting information if you want to dig in. And finally, if you are interested in a case study of the reader pen working with students, this little boy is a darling because he explains just how empowering being able to acquire language and using a reader pen is for him and has been, and how he actually develops a love of reading and reading books. It's a really nice case study, but I shan't do that in this time now. I should just make sure that the PDF is available for you so you can link over and watch that if it is of interest for you.